Initially, Emily assumed it was another of Max's protective routines. He was her protector, her shadow, always by her side. Ever since she and Jake had saved him from the shelter, he was the perfect dog. But tonight, this time, there was something different. Story comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Max stood rigidly in front of her, his entire body taut, ears pinned back. His deep brown eyes, warm and loving as they had been a moment before, were wide with anxiety. He released a series of sharp, frenetic barks, his eyes trained directly on her belly. "Max, stop it." Emily winced, squirming slightly. But he didn't move. He didn't blink. He barked again, then he growled. It started a low, guttural warning growl. Emily's breath hitched. Max never growled at her. Her hands moved unconsciously to her belly. "Jake!" she said, shaking the unsettling feeling tingling up her spine. Jake barreled into the room, footsteps thudding down the hall, worry marked on his face. "What's going on?" "It's Max," Emily said, her voice wavering. "He's acting really weird. He doesn't stop barking at my belly, and now he's growling." Jake frowned and crouched down to the dog's level. "Buddy, what's wrong?" he asked, reaching out. But Max didn't seem to notice him. He was fixated on Emily's belly. He approached closer, nose quivering as if he could smell something amiss. Then suddenly, he lunged forward. Emily gasped, throwing her hands defensively to her sides as Max butted his face into her belly. But he wasn't attacking her. He was sniffing, frantically, desperately, as if searching for something between her flesh. Then he let out a whimper. A visceral, desperate whimper, and that's when Emily sensed it. A piercing, twisting agony ripped through her abdomen, and a strangled gasp escaped her lips. She bent double, clutching her stomach, gasping through sharp, ragged breaths. "Emily!" Jake was frantic now, his hands gripping her shoulders. Emily's vision blurred. Her skin turned clammy. The room spun. Max never stopped barking amid it all, because he knew something they didn't. And by the time they realized that it might be too late. Emily's mind was spinning. The pain had been sudden, a deep, twisting feeling that didn't resemble the ordinary cramps of pregnancy she had long become accustomed to. This was different. This was sharp, sudden, unnatural. "Emily, look at me!" Jake's voice penetrated her haze. "Are you okay? Is it the baby?" I don't know," she cried, her fingers digging into her belly, as though with her hands she could solve whatever was going on under her skin. The pain was not constant. It echoed in waves, surging through her like electric pulses, before receding just enough for her to breathe. And through it all, Max kept barking. His nails scratched against the floor as he lunged at her again, his nose mashing into her stomach, sniffing desperately. He emitted another low, mourning whine, and then turned his attention to Jake, barking as if asking him to do something. What is wrong with him? Jake raked a hand through his hair, frustration apparent. Emily shook her head. "He's trying to tell us something," she gasped, wincing as the next wave of pain crashed over her. I think the baby is not okay." Once the words slipped from her lips, the air shifted in the room. Jake's face went pale and he trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance." But just before he could dial, Max lunged at him this time. Jake recoiled, eyes wide. "Max, what the hell?" But Max wasn't attacking. He was blocking him. The dog stood between Jake and Emily, legs wide apart, chest heaving, ears pinned back, whole body shaking. And then, for the first time since all this began, he gave a deep, guttural growl, not at Emily, not at Jake, But it's something else, something inside her. Emily felt cold blood seeping through her body. Jake, it was a mere whisper. What if he's right? Jake swallowed hard. He'd always believed in Max, trusted him more than he'd trusted most people. And right now, Max was terrified. "We're not waiting," said Jake, his voice strong. He grabbed the car keys. "Come on, we're going to the hospital now." Time lapse. The car races through the desolate streets. Streetlights flash in streaks of yellow and white. In the passenger seat, Emily clutches her belly, her face drawn in agony. Max is in the back seat, eyes trained on her, ears at attention, his whole body stiff as if he's bracing himself for something. In the car, there was silence, suffocating silence. Emily's mind raced. What was happening to her? She had been completely fine only hours earlier. There were no warning signs, no complications. But now she was still hanging on by a thread. "Almost there, Em," Jake murmured as he held on to the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were bloodless. But just as he said it, Emily gasped. The pain returned with greater intensity than she had thought possible, cutting, twisting, searing through her body like wildfire. Her vision clouded, and then the world shrank around her. Jake, she choked out. And then a deep, bone-rattling howl burst forth from Max. A long, mournful, desperate cry that sent chills down Jake's spine. Something was coming. Something wasn't right. And as they drove toward the hospital, neither could shake the very scary thing starting to intrude into their minds. What if Max had knowledge they hadn't? Jake didn't waste a second. He shoved the car door open and sprinted to the passenger side. "Emily, stay with me, okay?" His voice quavered, panic roiling below the surface. Emily groaned in answer, holding her stomach as she gasped for breath. The pain was unbearable now, sharp, unrelenting. It didn't feel like contractions. It felt twisted, wrong. The doors of the hospital swung open and 2 nurses came running toward them with a wheelchair. "She's 34 weeks pregnant. Severe abdominal pain started tonight," Jake blurted, his voice frantic. With Emily moaning in pain, the nurses moved swiftly, putting her in the chair. "We've got you, ma'am. Let's get you inside." "Wait, what about Max?" Jake looked back at their dog standing on the back seat staring at Emily. He refused to move. One of the nurses frowned. "No pets in the emergency room, sorry." Jake hesitated. It felt wrong to leave Max behind. "I'll stay with him," a voice called out from behind them. Jake looked back to see an older man in a janitor's uniform at the hospital doors. His face was kind, weathered, his eyes full of something Jake couldn't name. "I'll look after him for you, son," the man said. "Go take care of your wife." Jake swallowed hard, nodding. He rushed to Max and clutched his fur. "You're a good boy, aren't you, buddy? Stay here." But Max didn't blink. He chuffed a low whine, a noise resonating fear. Jake cringed and turned away, following behind the nurses as they pushed Emily inside. And then, as the doors slid closed, Max gave another giant, gut-wrenching howl. Time lapse within the hospital. Bright fluorescent lights, the beep of machines. Doctors in a flurry, voices overlapping as Emily is pushed onto a hospital bed. Jake walks next to her, heart pounding in his chest. Her vitals are stable, but she's in distress, a doctor mumbled, peering at Emily's medical chart. "We need an ultrasound, now." A nurse placed a cold, gel-covered probe on Emily's abdomen. Jake's fists inched toward the interior door as he waited. He couldn't shake the sense that Max had some information they lacked. "All right, let's see what's going on," the doctor said, staring at the screen. And then everything stopped. The doctor's face paled. The room that was once filled with motion went still. Jake's stomach twisted. "What is it? What's wrong?" His voice cracked. The doctor didn't respond right away. His gaze darted from the screen to Emily's belly, his jaw set. I have to check something." He swiftly adjusted the ultrasound settings with his fingers. The image on the screen, black and white, shifted, sharpened, revealed something new, which they hadn't seen coming. Jake caught his breath in his throat. Emily turned weakly to face the screen despite the pain. And that's when she saw it. A shape, an abnormality, something moving, something that was never meant to be there. "What is that?" Jake was demanding, his voice getting higher. The doctor hesitated. I don't know," he said, his voice barely audible. Emily's heart raced, the monitor beeping frantically next to her. Panic swelled in her chest. Jake seized hold of the doctor's arm. "You don't know? You're a doctor." "I'm aware of what a normal pregnancy complication is," the doctor retorted, his voice strained. "But this? I've never seen anything like it." Emily gasped, tightening her grip on Jake's hand. "Jake, I'm scared." Jake was too, because at that moment, staring at the distorted image on that screen, he had realized Max was right all along. Jake swallowed hard. His heart raced in his chest, thick thudding. "Doc, what the fuck is happening?" The doctor didn't immediately reply. His eyes flicked across the screen, scrutinizing every shadow, every stir inside Emily's belly. Something was there. Something that shouldn't be. "Emily," he said after a moment, his voice lower now, deliberate. "Have you had anything strange happen in this pregnancy?" Emily blinked at the now stranger, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "Unusual?" "What do you mean?" she croaked. The doctor paused before he went on. "Strange symptoms? Aches without explanation until today? Anything that felt different than a regular pregnancy?" Emily's breath hitched. Yes, she had noticed things. The weird, fluttery things that weren't regular kicks. The rare tightness in her stomach as though something were pushing from inside. Not painfully, but intentionally. She had dismissed it as something normal for pregnancy. But now, she wasn't so sure. I thought it was just normal stuff," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor let out a sharp breath and rubbed his temple. "I have to call the specialist." Jake's stomach dropped. "A specialist?" he snapped. "What does that mean?" Before the doctor could respond, Emily gasped. The pain was back, stronger. It pierced through her belly like a bolt of lightning, and this time she felt the movement. Not just a kick, not just a shift. Something pushed, something pressed outward. Emily froze utterly, her body stiffening. She gasped, strangled, her fingers digging into Jake's arm. "Oh my God!" Jake's breath caught in his throat and his eyes went to her belly. Her skin was changing. Something was pushing from the inside against the skin, moving outward in slow, measured eruptions, as if they were trying to escape. "Emily! It hurts!" she screamed, arching her body off the hospital bed as another wave of pain crashed. The doctor fumbled for his phone, calling for more medical personnel. The monitors surrounding them beeped erratically, the air thick with chaos and dread. Then, a deep, guttural bark. Everyone froze. It hadn't come from the room. It had originated beyond the hospital doors. Jake's head jerked toward the entrance. "Max!" Now Emily was struggling to breathe, her hands trembling as she reached for Jake. "He knows," she hissed between gritted teeth. Jake sprinted to the door, ignoring the nurse's protests. He charged down the hallway past the emergency waiting area and exploded outside. And there he was, Maximum, sitting perfectly still, not barking anymore, just staring. "Buddy!" Breathless, Jake spoke in short gasps, the cold air performing the traditional dance of condensation. Max didn't move. His body remained as rigid as stone, his ears fluttering a little, as though he were trying to listen to something no one else could hear. And then he growled, low, deep, as if he were telling Jake to turn back. It sent a shiver up Jake's spine, and then a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. "Emily!" Jake's stomach dropped. Spinning on his heel, he dashed back inside as fast his legs would allow. When he arrived in the room, it was chaos. Nurses were shouting. The doctor was scrambling for supplies. And Emily was doubled over, clutching her belly as the skin warped grotesquely under her fingers. Jake choked up. "Oh my God!" Then the power cut out. The space went dark. The sounds of machines stopped beeping. The overhead fluorescent glow disappeared. And into all that heavy silence, something moved. Emily gasped short, ragged breaths. She was barely able to process what was happening. Scan and scan and scan and scan. And then the doctors had her belly. The next, her skin was beginning to warp, shifting in unnatural ways. And now the power was out. She could still hear the soft beeping of the backup generator trying to activate, and distant voices in the halls. But in this room, all she could hear were her own heartbeats pounding in her ears. And something else, something moving, deep inside her belly. Jake's voice broke the quietness. "Somebody, do something!" The doctor fumbled for a flashlight and clicked it on. A bright beam of light flickered in the room, catching Emily's face, pale, sweaty, and wearing a pained expression on her face, her hands clutching her belly as if to hold something in. "Emily, stay with me!" Jake was there in an instant, grasping her hand. Emily's lips trembled. "Jake, I can feel it." Jake's blood ran cold. "Feel what?" She drew in a shaky breath, tears running down her cheeks. "It's moving." Her voice was little more than a whisper, but the grave finality of her words sent a jolt of fear through all those gathered. The doctor swallowed hard and gently set the ultrasound probe back on her belly. The screen flickered to life, if only for a fraction of a second, just long enough to see something large and moving. Then the screen went dark again. "What the hell is going on?" Jake's voice was rising in pitch, hands clutching Emily's. The doctor's expression was inscrutable. Even he didn't know what they were up against. Then, suddenly, Max barked, loud, urgent. Even outside the hospital doors, his voice sliced through the chaos like a warning siren. And in that moment, Emily screamed, a guttural, bone-chilling sound that made Jake's spine quiver. Then her belly shifted, not like a normal baby kick, not like a contraction, but like something pressed up from inside, forced against her skin so hard that it seemed to be fingers pressing through. "Oh my God!" One of the nurses stumbled back, almost overturning a tray of medical instruments. The doctor went pale, his flashlight quivering a little in his hand. "We have to get her into surgery now!" "What's happening to her?" "Jake," he called out, fear in his voice. "I don't know," the doctor barked back, "but if we don't hurry, we're going to lose her, and the baby." Another wave of unbearable pain racked through Emily, and her body arched off the bed. Then something snapped. It wasn't a noise from the machines. It was not a sound from the hospital. It came from inside her. Emily gasped, and her body stiffened. Jake felt his breath hitch. "Emily!" His voice broke. Slowly, her gaze lifted to him as her hands quaked. Jake, something's wrong. Jake couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, the lights came back on, and in that instant of clarity, everyone saw it. A bulge beneath Emily's skin, something great pushing outward from her belly, shifting, writhing, as if it were trying to claw its way out. Jake's world tilted, and right as he was about to open his mouth and scream, from outside the hospital, Max's furious barking reverberated, louder, more frantic than before, as if he knew they had no time left. The doctor's face was pallid, beads of sweat breaking out on his brow. "We need an emergency C-section now," he barked at the nurses. "This is beyond anything I've ever known. If we don't act quickly, she's not going to survive." Emily gasped again, her whole body now clawing off the bed. It was pushing harder now. A bulge from the skin of her belly distorted ominously as something underneath squirmed violently. Her hospital gown strained under the pressure, her belly twisting as if something were trying to escape. Jake! Her voice barely made it out. He swept her sweat-drenched hair from her face. His heart hammered against his ribs. "I'm right here, Hem. Just hang on." The doctor was already making an incision going faster than Jake had ever seen. His hands quivered, but his voice was steady. "Stay with me, Emily. We're going to get this baby out." Emily clutched Jake's hand, her nails digging in. Then a deep, unnatural growl echoed through the air. But it didn't come from Max. It was coming from inside the hospital room. The doctor froze. Nurses gasped. Jake felt his whole body stiffen. The air in the room changed. It was as if something invisible had entered. Then, the machines flatlined. Emily's monitor beeped once, twice, then went dead. No. The doctor snatched up his stethoscope, pressed it to her belly. His eyes went wide. "There's no heartbeat." It was as if Jake's whole world had crashed down around him. "Do something!" he bellowed, his voice cracking. "I'm trying," the doctor snapped. He reached for a scalpel, ready to start the emergency procedure. Then Emily screamed, her back arched, and her body bucked as her belly twisted violently. The skin rolled, the blob lodged deep inside, swelling, beating, moving. And then it stopped. Complete silence. No movement, no heartbeat, nothing. Jake let out a breath he'd been holding. "Emily?" he said, his voice quavering. She wasn't responding. The doctor peered, tracking her gaze between her stomach and the machines. And then something moved behind him. A shadow, a shape. Jake's eyes shot up, and his stomach plummeted. "Doctor!" He tried to warn, but it was too late. The surgical light overhead exploded. Glass shards sprayed in all directions, slicing through the doctor's arms and face as he fell back with a strangled shout. The nurses screamed, covering their heads from the raining debris. Emily's body writhed violently, short, shattering gasps of breath in and out. Then her belly shifted again, but this time it wasn't spreading out. It was retracting, like whatever had been inside was returning home. "Oh my God," whispered the doctor, his eyes wide with pure horror. Jake felt his hands go cold. What the hell is happening? Then the door burst open. Maximum. He barreled in, loud growls echoing through the walls. His hackles raised as he stared at Emily's abdomen. And then he attacked, straight at her belly. The room erupted into chaos. Jake's first instinct was to grab Max, to stop him, but something in his gut told him to let it happen. And in that moment of delay, Emily's body spasmed. Max's teeth bit inches from her stomach, and then she gasped. Her eyes flew open. A hitch hit her breath, and then the baby kicked. The machine's beeping was there, erratic, but there. Her heartbeat, it was back. The doctor cursed, lunging forward, the stethoscope pressing to her belly. I have a fetal heartbeat," he gasped. "It's weak, but it's there." Jake's hands shook. Max stood still now, panting, tail low, ears flattened. He wasn't attacking. He had been protecting. And just like that, what had been before was no more. Jake could still feel his heart pounding in his chest and adrenaline still rushing through his veins. 1 minute Emily was fading away. The next, she came back. The baby came back. "How is this even possible?" Jake whispered finally, his voice hoarse from yelling. The doctor was still panting, his white coat streaked red with the blood from the cuts on his arms. He looked back down at the broken equipment, then back at Emily. I don't know," he said, shaking his head. And then he says, "1 second, there's no heartbeat." And then all of a sudden, he pointed to the monitor, still beeping steadily next to her, like nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened. Jake clenched his jaw. Something had happened. He had seen it, felt it, and Max had known all along. The dog's gaze remained fixed on Emily's stomach, his head slightly lowered. His breath labored but measured, almost as if he was waiting for something more. "Jake!" Emily's voice was a mere whisper. Jake was facing her instantly, pushing a damp hair out of her eyes. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Emily's lips trembled. "It was inside me," she whispered. "I know it." Jake's grip on her hand tightened. He swallowed hard. "I know." Her gaze turned to the doctor. "Did you see it?" The doctor hesitated. His mouth opened and closed, as if deciding how truthful to be. Finally, he sighed. "I saw something," he confessed. "Something that was not supposed to be there." The room went silent. A shiver crawled up Jake's back. The doctor cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. "I can't explain it. What the ultrasound revealed was an unusual shape. Movement that was not consistent with normal fetal development. But the minute Max reacted, it was gone." Jake's hands curled into fists. "So what? So are you saying it just up and disappeared?" The doctor breathed heavily and rubbed a hand across his face. "All I know is that whatever it was..." He cocked his head, looking at Max. He felt it before the rest of us did. And when he lunged, it was gone. Gone. Jake's mind raced. Where? And then Emily shivered. Jake came back at her, right on alert. "What's wrong?" She swallowed, glancing about the room as if she sensed something they didn't. "It's still here," she whispered. Jake's stomach dropped. Max grumbled in a deep, warning growl. The doctor stiffened. "Impossible," he muttered. "If it's not in you anymore, then..." But then, a loud bang sounded from beyond the hospital room. Everyone's heads whipped toward the door. Jake felt the hairs on his arms stand. Max's body stiffened. Another bang, this time closer. Emily let out a shaky breath. "Jake!" And then the lights went out. Not just in their room. All of them. The entire hospital. Jake's breath quickened when the overhead lights flashed beside him, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Shadows unfurled impossibly long onto the walls. The emergency beeping of the machines reverberated, words running like a whisper beneath the static. And then the corridor turned pitch black. Max let out a snarl. Gripping Emily tighter, Jake's eyes drew in suspicion. "Doctor." There was a warning in his voice now. The doctor snatched a flashlight and switched it on, but its beam flickered weakly, fighting to remain lit. "What the hell is happening?" Emily took a sharp breath in. "It didn't go away," she whispered. "It just moved." Jake's blood ran cold, moved. To where? Then The sound of something moving in the hall. Not footsteps, not voices. Something crawling. Emily's nails clawed into Jake's arm. "Jake, don't let go of me." He wouldn't. Not for anything. And as the darkness in the hallway changed, as something slithered nearer, Jake understood something truly horrible. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Jake tightened his hold on Emily. His body was taut, instinct screaming at him to get the hell out. But where? Emily was still too weak. The baby, their baby, was still in danger. And something was out there. The doctor stood clutching his flickering flashlight and was turning to the door, pale-faced. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "Maybe it'll go away." Jake wanted to believe that. But Max didn't. The Pitbull's hair stood up and his lips pulled back from his teeth. He was waiting for something, watching, listening. Then, another sound. A low dragging noise. Not footsteps, not breathing. Something crawling. Emily shivered, gripping Jake's hand tightly. "Jake," she whimpered. "I know," he whispered back, straining to speak. His eyes scanned the hospital window. The outside world was normal. Cars moved in the distance. Streetlights glowed softly. The real world was still out there, still operating. But in here, it was like something had just torn them from reality into a nightmare. Then, the hallway lights blinked back on for a moment. Long enough for them to notice it. A shadow, long, twisted, crawling on all fours. Jake's breath hitched. Emily's fingers clawed at his skin. The doctor stumbled backward, and Max lunged straight toward the darkness. "Max, no!" Jake hardly had time to react before the dog sprang like a bullet and disappeared through the open doorway. The instant he did, the lights went out again, and the silence shattered. The hallway rang with a deep, unnatural shriek. A sound not human, not animal, something else. Emily screamed, "Jake, get him back!" But Jake was already moving. He sprinted into the hallway, heart pounding, lungs on fire. "Max!" he roared. The doctor grabbed his arm. "Wait! You don't know what's out there!" Jake ripped free. "I don't care! He's out there!" And without thinking again, he ran. Scene switch, the hospital corridor. Dark, empty, silent. The air's thick, heavy, like it's pressing on him. The emergency lights flickered dimly, casting long shadows along the sterile white walls. Jake's heart raced in his ears. He tilted his head back and forth, eyeing the corridor wildly. No Max. But there was something else. Scratch marks. On the walls. On the floors. Like something was dragged. Then a growl. Low. Dangerous. Alive. Jake turned sharply. And there, in the last corner of the hallway, barely there in the dim light, was Max. The Pitbull was frozen in place, its body low to the ground and its teeth showing. He was facing something Jake couldn't see. "Max." Jake stepped forward cautiously. "Buddy, come here. Let's go." Max didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. He had been staring at the shadows. Jake swallowed hard. His instincts told him to seize the dog and flee. But before he could, the lights flickered back on, and suddenly, Jake saw it. A figure. Tall. Unnatural. Wrong. It wasn't standing, it was hanging. Crushed against the hospital ceiling, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. Jake's stomach dropped. His breath had a hitch in his throat. It had no face, nothing, just a hollow void where its eyes should have been. And worst of all, it had its eyes focused right on him. Then it moved. Not like a person, not like an animal, like a puppet jerked by invisible strings, fast, jerked, twisted. Jake couldn't even scream. He did what his body would only let him do. He grabbed Max and ran, down the hallway, past the dark rooms, in the direction of the only light, toward Emily. "Jake, what's happening?" Emily's voice echoed in the hospital as Jake slammed the door behind him. His chest heaved, his hands shook. Max was still growling, still staring at the door, his body stiff as stone. And Jake? Jake couldn't speak, because he knew, he understood whatever it was, hadn't finished with them yet. Jake's heart was pounding in his chest, his mind was still spinning. What waited for him in that hallway, in the dark, wasn't human. "Jake," Emily's voice hung in the air like a whisper. She didn't need to add anything more. He looked at her, his face still colorless. He wanted to tell her things would be okay, that they were safe, but he couldn't, because they weren't. "We need to get out of here." His voice came out scratchy, threaded with urgency. The doctor, his flashlight still in hand, laughed weakly. "And go where, exactly?" "The entire hospital is in disarray." Jake clenched his jaw. "Anywhere but here." Emily inhaled sharply. "It's still here," she whispered. "I can feel it." Jake's stomach twisted. She felt it? Before he could ask, something knocked. 3 slow, measured knocks, right outside their door. The sound gave Jake an electric jolt that raced down his spine. Emily stiffened. The doctor froze. Max's growl became deep, his body lowering as if about to strike. Jake didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Then another knock. This time it was closer. Jake's instinct screamed at him to run, his fingers tightening around the doorknob. "Jake!" Emily choked out. "Don't open it!" Like he needed a reminder. But then the handle began to turn, a slow, calculated movement. Jake's entire body locked up. "We need to move," the doctor hissed, taking hold of a nearby cabinet and dragging it over to prop against the door. Jake came out of his stupor, hurrying to help. Max backed up by Emily, his eyes glued on the door. Then the knocking stopped. Silence. Jake hadn't had time to release a shaky breath when the lights exploded, every single one. The fluorescent bulbs exploded, showering the floor with glass and shooting jagged sparks into the air. The machines flatlined. The emergency alarms cut out. And at that moment, Emily screamed, "Something's in here!" Jake turned just in time to see her getting yanked. Her body lurched violently forward as if invisible hands were pulling her toward the middle of the room. "Emily!" He lunged toward her, taking her wrist just before she was pulled from the bed. Emily gasped, digging her fingers into his arm, her eyes alight with terror. "It's touching me," she whimpered. Jake pulled harder. "Let her go!" Max snapped. The Pitbull lunged at the nothingness in front of them, teeth bared, chomping at something no one else could see. His jaws closed shut, and then the room shifted. Not physically, not visibly, but Jake felt it, like the air itself around them had shifted. Then Emily was released. She fell into Jake's arms, panting. Max continued barking, staring at the air in front of them. What just happened?" The doctor's voice shook as he spoke. Jake had so many thoughts racing through his mind as he held Emily tighter. "I don't know," he admitted. "But Max just prevented that from happening, I think." The doctor scanned back and forth from the dog to Emily and back again at the wreckage of the hospital room. "It was inside of us," Emily said in a whisper. "It wasn't outside the door. It was in here all along." Jake clenched his jaw. "Then why did it stop?" Emily shuddered. "Because Max saw it." Jake's stomach twisted. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fit. Whatever this thing was, it did not want to be seen. And Max was the only one who could really see it, which meant "It's still watching us," Jake said, blood chilling. Emily squeezed his arm a little more tightly, and deep in the broken hospital's shadows, something was stirred. Jake swallowed hard. The atmosphere of the room seemed off, thicker, denser, like someone had been pressing down on them, like something was waiting. Emily dug her nails into his arm. "Jake, it's still here." His throat tightened. "I know." The doctor exhaled shakily. "We've got to get out of here, now." Jake nodded, letting Emily slide closer to him. "Yeah, but we can't just run blind. We need a way out that isn't going to trap us." "And go where?" the doctor snapped. "The entire hospital's losing power. The elevators are dead, the hallways." His voice faltered, and his face went white. Jake didn't have to hear the rest. They all knew what lay waiting out there. Max growled a low, guttural growl. The temperature dropped. Emily hugged her stomach and shivered violently. "It's getting closer," she said quietly. And then the door creaked open. Not slammed, not burst. Opened. Slowly, Jake's blood froze in his throat. The hallway beyond was dark, too dark, like the shadows were moving, as if the light itself would not come in. Then Max snapped. His bark pierced the quiet as his body flew forward in primal, unbridled rage. And in that moment, Jake could see it again, the figure, just past the threshold, hanging, twisted. Its limbs stuck at unnatural angles, crushed against the roof like a deformed, shattered spider. Jake couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then it moved, fast, jerked, twisted, coming straight for them. "Run!" Jake snagged Emily and ran. The doctor was right behind them, running down the corridor, swinging his flashlight wildly. Max was bounding ahead, barking his head off, taut with excitement, eyes all over. Flashing lights jerked through the hallway. The shadows canted and curved. Something was moving in the walls. Jake ran faster. "Stairs! Get to the stairs!" Emily hung onto his arm, struggling to keep pace. The pain was coming back. Jake, I..." Screech. That sound. Not human, not animal, something else. And it was right behind them. Jake didn't dare look. Max growled and turned halfway through his sprint to face whatever was pursuing them. "Max, no!" But the dog didn't hesitate. He thrust himself into the void. Jake skidded to a stop. "Jake, don't stop!" Emily shrieked, tugging on him. But Jake couldn't. Max was in there. "I'm not leaving him." She saw the doctor already at the stairwell, pale as a ghost. "We can't help him if we're dead. Move!" Jake gritted his teeth, fingers twitching. Then Max let out a whimper, a short, skittering yelp that froze Jake's blood. "No!" He pivoted, prepared to dash back into the dark. But then Max came running back. His body was down, his tail tucked, his whole shape shaking. And his eyes, wide, terrified. Jake had never witnessed him like that before. Max had fought everything. He had never backed down. But now he was running. And Jake didn't wait to learn why. "Go! Now!" They burst through the door of the stairwell. As soon as they did, the hallway behind them grew dark, like the darkness had consumed it entirely. Jake closed the door hard and locked it. His hands shook uncontrollably. For a few seconds, just silence, panting, desperate breathing, then knocking. Slow, deliberate, like it was taunting them. Jake leaned against the door with the blood rushing inside his ears. "Jake!" Emily gasped. He glanced at her, and his stomach sank. She was pale, her hands were trembling, and her leg was gushing blood. "Jake, the baby." Jake's world tilted. "Oh my God!" Max fussed, nudging his head against Emily's belly. "We have to get her out of here, now." But before they could make a move, the banging stopped. And in its place, a voice, distorted, hollow. It was coming from outside the door, a whisper. 2 chilling words, "Let Mr. in." Jake's entire body tensed. The words sounded hollow, unnatural, not meant to come from anything human. Emily wailed, doubled over, clutching her stomach. Max pushed himself up against her protectively, his ears flattened, a low, steady growl echoing in his chest. The doctor's face went pale. The flashlight trembled weakly in his quaking hands. That wasn't real," he stammered. "That was just some sort of—" Bang! Something hit the door, hard. Jake and the doctor stepped back in fright. Max's growl became a full snarl. "It's trying to get in," Emily gasped. Jake's grip on her tightened. "We have to keep moving," he whispered urgently. The physician nodded, his hands still shaking. "The basement," he muttered. "There's a service exit. It's our best chance." Jake barely hesitated. "Anywhere but here." "Let's go." The stairwell is hauntingly still except for the sound of footsteps. Every creak of metal reverberates like a warning. Every step is taking more out of Emily now. Jake holds on to her, practically whisking her down. Max moves ahead of them, ears shifting, nose raised to the sky, hunting for danger. The doctor puffed, holding his side. "I've worked in this hospital 20 years, he said, muttering. "I've never seen anything like this. That makes 2 of us," Jake ground out. Emily whimpered, "Jake, I don't know how much more I can take." Jake's heart twisted. "Almost there, baby. Just wait a little longer." Max suddenly stopped, frozen mid-step, his ears pinned back, his breathing shallow. "Max," Jake whispered. The dog didn't move. Then he turned his head. Jake followed his gaze up the stairs, and his stomach dropped. The shadow above was changing. Someone was descending from the upstairs, not fast, not rushing, slow, deliberate, like it was toying with them. Jake's pulse thundered. "Move! Now!" Max barked, a deep, urgent command. They ran. Emily made a rasping sob, unable to keep up. Jake had kept his arm around her, almost pulling her behind him. The basement door lay just ahead. "Almost there," the doctor panted. Jake took the handle, yanked it open. They rushed inside. And just as Jake turned to slam it shut, he saw it. For a millisecond, though. A shape, twisted, hanging from the ceiling, watching them. Then the door slammed shut. Scene transition. The cellar. A dark corridor with vintage hospital equipment along the walls. Dust lingers in the air. It smells damp, abandoned. The flickering emergency lights barely light the way in front of you. Emily was shaking. "Jake," she whimpered, "I don't feel right." Jake knelt next to her, sweeping damp curls from her brow. "I know, baby, I know. Just hang in there. We're on the home stretch." But deep down, he wasn't sure if they were. The doctor dabbed his forehead with sweat. "Service exit, over there at the end of the hall," he said, gesturing toward a rusted metal door. Jake exhaled shakily. "Then let's go." Max suddenly growled. Not a normal growl, a warning. Jake's stomach clenched. "What is it, buddy?" Max kept his eyes on the shadows. The doctor froze. "There's something wrong," he whispered. Jake followed his gaze, and then he saw it. The shadows were moving, not flickering, moving, like there was something in there crawling. Jake's breath caught. "Run!" They bolted. Emily was whimpering, falling behind. The doctor was wheezing. Max was running ahead, barking frantically. The exit was close. Then the lights cut out. Complete darkness. Emily screamed. Something rushed past them. Jake sensed the air change. sensed something graze his arm, and then Emily got pulled away. "No!" Jake spun, but she was gone, swallowed by the dark. "Emily!" Her screams pierced the air. Jake ran after her. He did not care what lurked in the dark, didn't care about the danger, because the only thing that mattered now was getting her back. Jake's whole body froze as the horror of the moment settled in. "Emily!" His voice reverberated down the hall, absorbed into the thick, choking blackness before him. No response. Max was at his flank, stance rigid, ears pinned back, teeth bared. He never stopped his low warning growl. Jake's chest heaved. He looked to the doctor, who was standing petrified, hand gripping the rusted metal door to the exit. "Where is she?" Jake's voice held a thread of strain. The doctor swallowed loudly, his flashlight trembling in his hand. I don't know," he stuttered. "She was there 1 second, then the lights went out, and the shadows took her." Jake balled his fists in fury, heat boiling through him. "We have to hunt her down," he growled. The doctor stepped back, his face white. "Jake, we don't know what we're up against. If they go in there, they're going to get—" "I don't care!" Jake roared. "I'm not leaving her." Max made an excited bark, as if to agree, and then they heard it. Emily's voice. "Jake!" Jake's heart stopped. The voice was coming from behind the darkness. Software weak, far away. "Emily!" Jake lunged, but Max barked loudly, snapping at his arm, stopping him. "What the hell?" Jake snapped at the dog. Max let out a sharp whimper. Then Emily spoke again. "Jake, help me." Jake's blood ran cold. Something was wrong. The voice, it was too soft, too controlled, as if it wasn't even coming from her, like someone was saying it for her. Max let out a low growl, lowering his body, every muscle taut. Jake's breath was quick, sharp. "Emily," he said tentatively. Silence. Then, "Jake, it hurts." That did it. Jake bolted. "Jake, wait!" Jake charged into the darkness, the doctor's voice fading behind him, cut to the bottom of the basement. The hallways are black now. The emergency lights are completely out. The only light comes from Jake's phone flashlight, flickering slightly in his unsteady hand. Max runs next to him, breath heavy, body tense, ears waving wildly, listening for something Jake can't hear. Jake's pulse thundered. Where was she? "Emily!" he called again, a faint noise, like breathing. Jake whirled toward the sound, bringing up his flashlight. And then he saw her, Emily, frozen in the middle of the hallway. But her hospital gown was threadbare. Her hair was wet and plastered to her face. Her eyes were wide, too wide. She didn't blink, didn't move. She just stood there, staring at him. Jake's stomach twisted. "Emily!" he whispered. No response, and then her lips curled up in a smile. Not relief? Not happiness? Something else? Something wrong? Jake took a hesitant step forward. "Baby, it's me. I'm here." Emily blinked slowly. "I know," she whispered. Jake's pulse spiked. Her voice, it wasn't hers. Max offered a low, warning growl. Jake felt his body freeze. "Emily?" And then her head twisted grotesquely to the side. Too far. A sickening crack rang out in the hall. Jake's stomach dropped. Then Emily lunged, not at him, at Max. The Pitbull had so little time to react that Emily's hands had already grabbed onto his fur and pulled him to the shadows. "No!" Jake lunged. He took hold of her arms and immediately regretted it. Her skin was ice cold, and her pulse wasn't there. Jake's breath hitched. Then Emily's lips moved, but the voice that emerged wasn't hers. "Let me in." Jake's mind snapped. Max yipped, twisting free. Jake seized Emily, shaking her. "Fight it, Emily, fight it!" Emily's body convulsed. Her lips twitched. Just for a second, Jake caught a flash behind her eyes, like she was waking up, like she was trapped. And then she gasped. Her whole body jerked back. She dropped into Jake's arms, her eyes flickering like a weak flame, her gasps coming unevenly in tearing sobs. "Jay? Jack?" It was her voice, the real her. Jake felt a wave of relief, but then the shadows behind her shifted. Jake scarcely had time to react before something leapt from the dark. Something big. Something that has too many limbs. Max was barking madly and snapping at the air. Jake grabbed Emily and ran. The thing chased them. It was fast, too fast. Jake could hear it. Crawling, twisting, moving. The voice of the doctor rang out from the distance. "Jake, the door, now!" Jake saw it. The exit. Jake pushed himself harder. Emily clung to him, her head barely able to stay up, whimpering, "Hold on!" Max streaked forward, barking madly. Jake got to the door, ripped it open, and the minute they passed through it, Max turned and bit at the empty air. The door slammed behind them. And then, silence. Jake crumpled against the wall, wheezing. Emily shook in his arms, breathing. Max was growling, tail low, ears back. Jake turned his head, his stomach twisting. The door. It was rattling, like something on the other side was still trying to get in. And then, in the silence, a single, slow knock. Every muscle in Jake's body went stiff. Then, it spoke. "Not yet," Emily cries, burying her face in Jake's chest. "Jake," she whispers, "the baby." His heart pounds as he cups her face. "You're okay. You're both okay." Max whimpers low, ears flicking. Jake faces the door again, waiting. Nothing. The shadows don't move. The door remains shut. The entity is gone. Finally, Max exhales as he nudges Jake's leg, his way of saying, "We can go now." Jake gulps, then nods. "Let's go home." Lifting Emily into his arms, he walks with Max, trotting at his side to the car. And, as the light starts to glow behind them, they drive away, not looking back.